If I was going to make my first million, what I would do.
Would you mind sharing some of your worst or hardest mistakes that you
I mean, I lost money on 5 of my first 8 deals.
Whoa.
If you're going to go start a business or pursue some career, go in with the expectation that it's going to take like 10 years. And people don't want to hear that.
You know what I'm realizing is the people who watch this whole episode are going to get the whole value of the $250,000 education at a Stanford Business School. All right, Graham, ready to dive in?
Let's do it.
All right. You have a star-studded resume at this point. One of the top professors at Stanford Business School, $11 billion private equity fund, family man. And then now, I was just checked today, I was like almost 1 million followers on TikTok. So when you look back and you think back to your early 20s, if you were to give advice to your younger self, what would that be?
I think that a lot of it comes down to your habits. And people think that they are going to be successful with these big sweeping moves and that they're going to have some massive event that's going to change their life. But really, if I look back, it's a sum of tiny little habits. Working out every day, sleeping really well, writing down my goals, writing down the things I'm going to do each day to work toward my goals, doing stuff when you don't want to do it, and just throwing yourself into, the things you're supposed to do as opposed to the things you want to do, but doing it daily, like day after day after day after day.
I love that.
So it's kind of a boring answer, but that's the answer. So like I think people just sometimes sit around waiting for some great inspiration or someone to some big crypto thing that's going to change their life or whatever. The real answer is like the work that you are supposed to be doing today is all you really need to do.
I love that. And I think I've learned that myself over time as well, is the simple, boring things are actually the ways to success over life. It just takes commitment and compounding over years, if not decades, to get there.
It takes compounding over years, and in my case, decades. Yeah.
And so when you think about that today and you think about the market environment today, if you were, let's say, in your early 20s now, if you wanted to go from zero to your first $1 million, what would you do? What would be your playbook?
All right, my playbook. So I'm in private equity, so my playbook would be private equity. So what I would do if I was going to make my first $1 million is I would go around and I'd look for a small private business. And I use the example of like a car wash. So I might go find all the different car washes that are in the area, and I might see who has the best location and what's the car wash that I think has the best potential. And I'd probably talk to the owners of those and try to get them to sell me their car wash. And then I would finance the vast majority of that with debt. First off, the owner can give you a seller note, meaning they'll take back a note to finance a part of the purchase. Let's say you buy the car wash for $500,000. You might get him to finance $100,000. So now you only need to come up with $400,000. And then there might be a building that has some value you could get a mortgage on. And then there might be some value of the business you get a bank loan on. And you can get the equity that's required to go into that down to a pretty small amount of money. And if you don't have that money, you could go around and try to raise money from investors, but then you go buy that car wash. Then I would run the hell out of that car wash. I would have the best car wash in the world. I would go in, I would make sure every customer walked out of there just thrilled with their experience, and word would travel. And then eventually I would learn how to run it really, really well. And then I'd buy another one and another one and another one. And that's basically how I started. I did that with label printing companies when I was 25 years old. I started buying these little label printing companies, same concept. But what I think the mistake people make is they go do what everyone else is doing. Yeah. Like I can pretty much tell you that your fortune, if you're listening to this and you haven't been in crypto, your fortune's not in crypto because everyone in the world's doing that. And so like, it's almost like you want to go where other people aren't going.
There's a theme there to your first piece of advice around doing the boring, simple things. Yeah. Everyone's always fascinated with the sexy AI tech crypto thing, but there's something to be said with these boring, unsexy companies like a car wash or a laundromat. If you can just operate the hell out of them, like you said, and just generate stable, consistent cash flows that compounds and accumulates over time. And it sounds like
exactly
you started with this label printing business. How do you take a single label printing business and then turn that into the private equity empire that you have today?
Well, it took a long time. I bought this label printing company in 1997. It's 2023 right now.
Yeah.
So it didn't happen overnight, and by the way, the first one I bought didn't do that well. And I bought another one, and it was the third one I bought that did really well. And then, I learned a lot because I made a lot of mistakes on the first one. I made a couple more mistakes on the second one. By the third one, I knew exactly what I was looking for, and I bought the right one. And then that one did really well. And then I bought another one, and then I started to build up a track record. And then based on that track record, I was able to raise like a small fund, which is what most people think of as private equity. But private equity actually is everything. I mean, that all those little deals I did that's all private equity too. That's just financed a little bit differently. Eventually, I had a track record where I could walk in and get someone to give me like what you think of as a private equity fund. But that took a long time to get there.
And what I'm hearing from a long time too, there are probably a lot of battle scars, a lot of mistakes made. You alluded to them. Would you mind sharing some of your worst or hardest mistakes that you went through?
Well, I'll just tell you the track record first, and then I'll tell you some of the mistakes. But I lost money on 5 of my first 8 deals.
Whoa.
And then
not a very good investor at first.
Yeah. So once we finally raised a fund, which took me a year to get, actually just the fundraising itself took a year. I lost money on that fund. So, we started off horrendously. So those were some, that's kind of battle scar grouping number 1. And then battle scar grouping number 2 was the time of the Great Recession. We just got flattened. We had companies in default. It took us 5 years to raise another fund. I drained my savings account for the second time to make payroll. So yeah, definitely had some battle scars along the way. In terms of lessons learned, do you want them specific for investing or just more generally about building a business? I'm
actually just curious, how do you persist through that kind of pain and self-questioning? I'm sure that comes up.
Well, I had the benefit of, I'll tell you, I had the benefit of an experience that helped me, which was, I'll go back a little bit in time. So when I was in high school, I wrestled, and I was a pretty good wrestler. And I had this match my junior year. I was the number 1 ranked kid in the district, and I was wrestling the number 2 ranked kid, and I lost. And I was so distraught that I quit. And that was the last match I ever wrestled in my life. And I never wrestled again. And then for the next rest of my junior year and my senior year, I regretted that. And I was like, I felt horrible. I was like, I should have just kept going. It was one match. It was one loss. But I regretted that for the rest of my senior. So then I went to college and I rode crew. Freshman year, get cut, was horrible. Go down and use the rowing machines in the morning to try to get better. Sophomore year, 2 weeks before the big race, I got seat raced out of the boat, come back. Anyway, just keep going and keep going. And I literally wrote down every single day in my journal, I am the best rower in the United States and I am never going to quit no matter what happens. I wrote that every day in my journal. And then by my senior year, I was captain of a national championship rowing team, and I had one of the top erg times in the world. And so I just saw that it just takes time. And so when I got to Alpine and started Alpine, I was I had the expectation that it was going to take some time. And I also had the knowledge that that I was going to stay with it. And that if I did, eventually it would work out. But it took a long time.
I love that story of sheer persistence, because having spoken, I've been lucky to speak to so many billion-dollar entrepreneurs, and you meet so many different kinds of people. And the one consistent pattern I've seen between all of them is just they never gave up.
Yeah.
That's just actually the only thing. But I think that requires an immense self-belief that you've cultivated over time. I think a lot of folks that are, let's say, younger and haven't, grown into themselves yet, how would you recommend they actually build that self-belief to just persist?
Well, the thing is, I think you're set up to not have the expectation. You're set up for the wrong expectation. You're set up that things are going to happen fast, and that if they don't happen fast, then you're doing it wrong. You're set up that all you have to do is pay $9.99 for this, option trading program, and you too can make $30,000 a month of passive income. All that's just nonsense. I don't know anybody. I know a lot of people that have made a lot of money starting companies. We've invested in over 400 companies, cashed out 400 entrepreneurs. I've met all of them. I've met tons of people in my space and teaching at Stanford. I've met literally thousands and thousands of people, and I've never met anyone that I can think of that, had some overnight success. That's just like a pipe dream. But that's what gets sold to us over and over and over. So I think the first part is like, go in with the expectation that if you that it's going to take like 10 years. Like, and people don't want to hear that. But that's what I mean. I think if you're going to go start a business or pursue some career, like, go in with the expectation that it's going to be a long ride. And that's okay, because your whole life is that ride. Like, that's the fun of life, is that process of going toward it. So if it takes 10 years, that's great. That's your adventure. That's your adventure of life. And just kind of have a different mindset. I'd say that's the number one thing, is to have a different mindset at the beginning.
One thing that clicked for me there is just around, you're right, we live in this world of instant gratification, right? You post the TikTok and then you wait for the dopamine. It's almost like you're building for the long term. But one thing you said there around adventure really hit with me, because before this we were talking about how do you enjoy the journey, right? How do you not just feel pain and misery the whole time you're trying to build a company? I'm curious if you can share advice with us of like, how do you actually enjoy this wild ride that is life?
Well, that's a pretty deep question. I mean, that's kind of the question of like all of life is, how do you enjoy it? And I'll tell you, one of the best concepts I've come up with is this. There's a book called Flow, and I'm going to butcher the author's name, so I'm not even going to say it because it's impossible to say. But basically, what the author goes through and talks about is the things that we think make us happy are actually not the things that make us happy.
Yeah. What
we think makes us happy is having our feet up on the on a lounge chair on the beach in Mexico, and like having some attractive person feeding us grapes or something, or pleasure, like seeking pleasure. Like that's the thing that makes us happy. But his research has actually shown what really makes you happy is being completely present in the moment in whatever you're doing. And that could be cooking. It could be writing a book. It could be reading a book. It could be doing this podcast. It could be anything, like anything where you're just locked in. And he calls that state flow. And his basic solution to life is like, align your life so you're spending as much of it in flow as you can. And that's really what's going to make you happy. Now, juxtapose that with the earlier conversation we had about building a business. And now your whole life and your 10 years and all that is this adventure you're going on. And you're just putting yourself in these flow states the whole time. And there's no good or bad. You can have flow. I have flow in a management meeting. I have flow in a one-on-one with an employee. I have flow in a fundraising meeting. I have flow when I'm evaluating a business, when I'm sitting in a board meeting. Like, you just kind of like throw yourself into it. And like, that actually is the joy of life, And so I know we got kind of deep there, but that's sort of the way that I've kind of tried to frame it is, flow is not, or, life and happiness and all that is not what you get at the end when you achieve some goal, because as as I know, that's really fleeting and actually can be really depressing.
Yes.
Hitting your goal can be, I know this sounds really weird to say, but it can be one of the most depressing things you'll ever do, because you expected it to be really different than that, and it wasn't. So realize that the actual love is that flow that you're in that 10 years while you're working toward it.
I love the piece around hitting the goal can be a curse in some ways. You meet so many successful entrepreneurs who finally sell their business for $1 billion, and the next day they wake up and they're depressed.
Yeah, totally.
Because they didn't realize the journey was the process and the enjoyment. So I'm curious for you, because I think a lot of folks struggle with what flow actually means. It's such an abstract concept. Mm-hmm. What does flow feel like to you? And then maybe you can translate that into how that's actually helped you be successful.
I think it feels like you're totally in the moment and you're present. You're challenged a little bit. You're not thinking about, the future and the past. You're really just giving yourself permission to not have to stress about what happened before, what happened after, and you're just locked in the moment. And that's when you're going to have the most fun and enjoyment, and you're going to be better at your job anyway. So that's kind of what it feels like.
That's great. And then I'm actually going to have us channel our past selves, because I think we share something in growing up pretty middle class.
Yeah.
When you grow up in a lower socioeconomic class, you're told do these things to be successful and happy. You get those things, and then you realize it's about the journey. One thing I love about your story is you grew up mowing lawns to just like take care of yourself, pay the bills, all that kind of stuff. And what I want to help people feel is like, I actually believe that given the fact that I grew up with a single mom, immigrant kid, no connections, I actually think that helped me be successful for a number of reasons, because it taught me the value of hard work, all that kind of stuff. I'm curious if you could share how being in these circles now, the ones you're in, and you're seeing, a lot of people grew up with a lot more privilege, how actually has your background, not having a silver spoon, actually led you to be successful?
Well, I think it, I had jobs at a very young age. I mean, I started mowing lawns when I was 10. I started actually focusing on making and saving money when I was 10. If I wanted to buy something, I had to decide that I was going to spend, for example, a month of lawn mowing money or 2 months to buy a Sony Walkman to start to listen to motivational tapes. But that was my money. So when I got those tapes, I really, really listened to them because I had invested in it. And so I think it totally helped. And I think, no matter what your background or situation is, the narrative of the most dangerous narrative you can have is I'm a victim. That's just, life's not fair. Woe is me. And again, I'm a white male. Okay. So I say that with a lot of trepidation to even make that statement, but the victim mentality, whether it's true, whether you've had hardship or not, no matter what your situation is, it is going to kill you.
Yeah.
Irrespective of what your situation is, the idea that I'm a victim of this unfair life, no matter what your situation is, that will kill you, because you're basically putting the power outside of yourself and you're giving it away. And there's really no, the empowering, it's a really just disempowering mentality.
Yeah. It's don't let them take the agency away from you.
Yeah.
Because when you lose your agency as a human being, you lose a lot of that will to live and that will to just be yourself. I mean, I think Viktor Frankl talks about a lot in Man's Search for Meaning, if you've read that. So I think one frustration I would have watching this in terms of you have agency, just don't give up, believe in yourself. I feel stuck. I feel genuinely stuck. So how do you get through that?
Yeah. I think a lot of that happens a lot is you're in a job or you're in a routine and you want to make changes, but you're not really sure where to start. And you have all these reasons why you can't change anything. And I think that the first thing is people are confused about where motivation comes from. They think that they're going to have some divine inspiration that's going to, lead them to a new job or a new career. That's not actually what's going to happen. What's going to happen is you're going to take action first before you have the motivation. And so think of one small habit that you could start that would move you toward your goal. A simple one, a really simple one, that's one of my favorites that I've shared with you is, let's say you're in a career and you're in career X and you actually want to be in career Y, and you're not sure how to change or start. Just write down every single day. This takes 5 minutes. Write down 3 things you could do to move to career Y, and then do those things or schedule those things, and then wake up tomorrow and do it again, and wake up the next day and do it again, and wake up the next day and do it again. And in 3 months, you'll basically have career Y. I mean, you will compound those efforts, so quickly. I've had more success. What I would say to listeners is you will have more success and move further toward your goal in 3 months with this simple thing of writing 3 things down every day than you will in 3 years of not doing that.
I love that. You've dispelled the notion of the creative inspiration that apple falls on Newton. It's much more about creating momentum, inertia.
Exactly.
And you do talk a lot about setting goals, right? How important that is to our success. Could you share a little bit more about why that's so important?
Yeah. Think about how you're wired. There's different studies on this, but somewhere between 2 to 5% of your thoughts are conscious. And that means 95 to 98% are subconscious. Your subconscious is kind of like the wild, wild west, and it's rooted in, and it has a tendency to go negative. And I think that's from the caveman days or something, when you had to worry about the noise in the bushes or something. So you have 95 to 98% of all your thoughts that are kind of wired negative. What happens when you start to set goals and write them down is you start to grab hold of that 95 to 98% of your subconscious, and you start to point it somewhere. And you're not just pointing it anywhere. You're pointing it exactly where you want to go.
Yeah.
And then that's like when people talk about manifesting things.
I was about to make a joke about manifestation.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much content on here about manifesting. But what actually happens is you've got 95% of all your energy now is directed toward a place you want to go. And like good things happen when that happens. The most magical thing that I've had about writing my goals is, I'll use an example from college. I wrote down, I was a novice rower. Didn't even know the boats went backwards. I mean, I was from Ohio. There's no water like in Ohio. So I wrote down, this is what one of my self-help books told me to do. Write it in the present tense, about the goal you wanted. I wrote down, I am the best rower in the United States. And then, by the way, I was getting cut from the third freshman novice boat at the time I wrote these goals. But what happened is, when you write your goal every day, a part of you starts to assume the identity of someone who's already achieved that goal. That will happen because your subconscious, that 95 to 98% is going toward that direction. So like in 4 years, never once when my alarm went off in the morning did I hit snooze and go back to bed, because I'm like, well, the best rower in the world gets up and goes to practice. And I did that every single day for 4 years. So there's a lot of power in writing out your goals beyond just like the tactics. You're getting your whole subconscious moving that way.
So you've made it sound really easy. I even feel inspired. I'm like, I should go do that right now. What are some of the footfalls or the mistakes someone might make in that process?
I mean, it's like any habit where the mistakes people make in any habit are they fail for a couple days and they fall off the wagon, and then they just throw in the towel. And you're going to have days where you don't write them down. You're going to have days where you write down the 3 things and you don't actually do them. So just get up tomorrow and do it the next day, And so I think it's the same failure you have in any habit. But if you do it for a week, you'll see so much progress that I think you'll continue doing it.
I love that. For some reason, I'm called to ask questions about Stanford Business School students.
Let's do it.
Which is something that's been nagging me a lot recently, because you talk a lot about doing your own thing. And this is going to ruffle some feathers, but all
right. I like it already.
I was really disappointed with the percentage of my class that went into jobs like consulting at McKinsey or what have you. One can argue like there's some value to it, but like you could be solving cancer or like building. There's a lot that Stanford pitches like being the entrepreneurial center.
Right.
So I think the argument for the benevolent way to look at it is like someone's just like looking to build. It's a great place to build skills. I'm very grateful for my time in banking. I got to make so many caveats here, but like, I think a lot of people, their souls go to die at like those kinds of desk jobs.
Right.
So when does someone know when to do that kind of job, to learn, to build skills, to build like relationships, and when to actually go off and do their own thing and ideally make the world a better place?
Well, I love that you asked that question. So I started teaching there in 2014, and for the first 4 years, I taught the skills, right? Here's how you hire, here's how you fire, here's how you fundraise, here are the skills that you're going to need as an entrepreneur. And that my whole class was about that. I put tons of energy. I had case guests flying in to talk about these things. And then I realized none of the students actually did it. Like they learned all these things, and my class got high ratings, but no one actually went and did it. So then I'm like, okay, hang on. I'm teaching the wrong thing. I got to like back up. And I gotta figure out, why are students not actually doing the thing they want to do? And when I say, like, this is the distinction, I don't care what someone wants to do. If someone wants to go to Goldman Sachs, great, wonderful. But the thing is, the student wrote their essay about X.
Yeah.
And X might have been curing cancer or whatever X is, solving homelessness or whatever it is. I just want them to do the thing that they wrote their essay on, because that's what they really want to do. So I started saying, what's holding them back? So I spend a lot of energy on like, what do you really, really want? And are you clear on that? And the students actually are usually pretty clear on what they want. If they knew they weren't going to fail, what would they do? If it took them 10 years, what would they do? They're pretty clear on that. And then I have to say, well, why aren't they doing that? And then we get into like, what are all the limiting beliefs? So we write down the limiting beliefs and we put them on paper, because when you write them down, all of a sudden, they're no longer swirling in your head. They're just like to-do items. Like,
they're not as scary too.
Yeah. Like, for example, one of my limiting beliefs is I don't know how I'd finance my startup. Just becomes, I need to finance my startup. Well, that's just a to-do item. It's not this big scary fear that's this nebulous ephemeral thing that you can't figure out. It's like, no, you can figure out how to start. I bet other people have figured out how to get a business funded. So let's work on that. Now it's just a problem that we solve like any other problem. So I started working a lot on that content, limiting beliefs, like getting, clear on our goals. We spent a whole day on like, what do you really want to do? How do you move toward it? What habits do you need to develop? And I started seeing a larger percentage of people going into the thing that they really want.
You know what I'm realizing is the people who watch this whole episode are going to get the whole value of the $250,000 education at a Stanford Business School. You've just given up, like, truly, I hope people, I was like, guys, pause the video and just do this exercise right now. Cause it's, you've made it so simple, which is think deeply about what you truly, genuinely want authentically, not what society tells you. Then write out the fears, limiting beliefs that scare you from that. And then let's crush through them.
Exactly. Yeah. And then let's build habits to start moving toward them on a daily basis. And that's it, and then you're, as we talked about earlier in the podcast, like you'll be in flow. I'm going to go off on a little bit of another riff, which is, where does stress come from? Stress comes from, like, we think stress comes from hard work or this, or I'm tired, whatever. Stress actually comes from conflict. It comes from when like you have two values or two things that are in conflict. That's actually, like, hard work doesn't actually create stress. Stress is when you're working hard on something that you're not excited about, or when you're working hard on something and you want to be at your son's, Little League game. Like that's where the stress is. It's when there's a conflict. So if you can like figure out what your real heart is set upon and you start spending your energy on those things, you're not that stressed. I mean, there's stressful things that come up, but like on a daily basis, you're getting out of bed, moving in the direction that your heart is set upon. It eliminates a lot of friction, and I think people don't really realize how they show up and how much energy they have when they get rid of that friction. Like, I showed up totally differently when I was starting Alpine and running it than when I was working at a corporate job. I had thought, if you'd asked me how much my potential I was using in my corporate job, I would have said, oh, I'm using like 80%. And now, actually having used 100%, I would go back and I would revise that number and I'd say I was using like 5%.
That was a huge unlock for me there, Graham, which is like, if you had asked me back in my banking days how much of my capacity I was using, I'd be like 120%.
Yeah.
I'm working 110-hour weeks. I'm staying up late formatting slide decks from green to blue or whatever I was doing then. And now, the thing about entrepreneurship, about believing in yourself, that I've learned in my journey so far is it's all about learning how to grow your capacity. So yes, I think at the time I was using 110% of what I thought. I was deeply uninspired, deeply unpassionate about what I was doing, very unfulfilled. Now, in order to chase this fulfillment and excitement I have about our mission and what we do, I have to continue growing my capacity.
Yeah, you have to grow, right?
Yeah, so I'd still say I'm probably using a lot of my capacity. I'm tired all the time, burnt out, which is a whole nother thing to not discuss now, but my capacity is like 10x or 100x since that person that I started as.
Yeah, I mean, when I was also in banking, I mean, I was using 100% of my hours. I was just using about 2% of my mental capacity.
Especially the creative side.
Yeah. Creative, leadership, thoughtful analysis. I mean, I was just doing rote stuff.
Yeah, because it's funny. The one thing I'm curious how you deal with this in terms of managing your energy is I'll oftentimes feel frustrated now, where I think back to when I was younger and I was cranking for 100 hours a week. And I have to recognize that it's because I wasn't thinking, right? I was just like plugging away at a financial model I'd done 100 times. In these moments now, you're kind of pioneering now, right? There's no playbook for what you're doing. Right. Number one, how do you navigate that just ambiguousness, that loneliness? And then how do you think about managing your energy within that to do the right thing for you?
A couple things. I'm going to talk first about pioneering. So we probably have, without hyperbole, 20 things that we do at our private equity firm that no one else does, which is kind of surprising because it's an industry that has 5,000 firms that's been around a long time. I would say we probably have 20 things that only we do. those come from, we actually schedule innovation. We put it on the calendar. We get the right people in the room. We ask the right questions, and we give ourselves permission to have it be messy and come up with crazy ideas. I'll give you the questions we ask, which is what's not going well we need to fix? Where's our process getting where are bottlenecks breaking down? What could kill us that we need to kind of extinguish? And then the most important question of all, what's going well that we could scale? That last question is probably where we made 90% of our money. What's going well that we could do more of and scale? So we actually schedule innovation. We put it on the calendar. We do this probably more than I bet we do this more than a lot of the firms you would think of as traditionally innovative. And that's led to just unbelievable breakthroughs that we've had. So on your first point about pioneering, yes, we are pioneering, and we make a point to do that. Your point about managing energy is huge. I mean, I am so committed to this, because like when I'm energetic and I feel great, I make better decisions, and I just enjoy life. Like when and I realize the converse of that is also true. When I'm exhausted and miserable, I don't. And so I had this switch where all of a sudden I switched from how little can I sleep to how much can I sleep. So what's foundational for me is sleep, first of all, I think is the biggest life changer. And so I have a whole routine around that. I don't want to tell you when I go to bed, but
all right, Grandpa.
I go to bed early. I get up early. I sleep a lot. And then my diet is crazy strict. I've learned a lot about my diet and getting the right supplements and what I'm eating. I don't drink caffeine. I don't drink alcohol. I don't take sleeping pills. I don't eat gluten. And I have the same energy now. I'm 51 than I did when I was 21. I probably have more, but it takes a lot more dials turning. When you're 21, you can go and do lots. You
can go out.
You do lots of stuff, but I spend a ton of energy trying to manage, how I feel and the physical part, because that makes a big difference.
I have one last question on this private equity empire piece that you're building before we shift to the tactical. Which is, if you're allowed to share, I just love your energy around, I'm going to build the very best private equity firm in the world because I know what you're going up against. I'll name them. If you're allowed to share the play, any vision here, can you paint for us? How are you going to go up against the Blackstones, the Carlyles, the Apollos of the world and build a better firm than them?
Just have to play a different game. I think a huge important part of life is, are you playing a winnable game? If you're going out and bidding on the same things that everyone else is bidding on, you're not playing a winnable game. It's going to get bid down to the lowest guy's solving for in terms of his returns, which is, by the way, about 12%, 14%.
Woof.
In short, what we're doing is we manufacture our own management teams, meaning we hire people out of Stanford and Harvard and all kinds of different business schools, and we build our own leaders, and that allows us to go buy companies that don't come with leadership, corporate carve-outs or business where the founder wants to retire or exit or whatever. And that pond doesn't have a lot of people fishing in it because it's really hard to do. So that's just one example, but in general, we try to play a game that's totally different. If we're playing the same game as everyone else, we're not going to be the best in the world. And by the way, all of them playing the same game kind of have all the same returns.
Yeah. You're competing all the alpha way.
Yeah.
Cool. So shifting the conversation now, when I think about your private equity business today, you have a very specific philosophy for how you run a business. Could you share more about what that is? And I kind of want to press you on it.
Yeah.
It sounds like a lot of corporate.
So I'll go back to this time around the recession. I hired my first ever executive coach, and this guy's amazing. His name's JP Flom. And so we're having this conversation, and I tried to we had a weekly coaching conversation. By the way, I couldn't afford an executive coach back then. I don't even know what compelled me to hire him, but it was a great decision. And we can talk more about executive coaching if you want. But so we had this conversation, and I tried to cancel it like 3 times. And he's like, no, this is our deal. We have, every Tuesday at 8 a.m. we talk. So he starts asking me what's so stressful. And I say, I got to fly to Dallas, and I got to fix this thing. And then I got to go to Chicago and deal with this. And then I got to DC and deal with this. And I'll keep this story kind of short, but like when we went to Dallas and we did like the root cause, why. At the end of all of that was I had the wrong CEO running the company. And then when we talked about me flying, so I was going to go do this diving save, and then when we talked about Chicago, we were going to lose this deal. And why? Well, because the vice president at my firm was the wrong person. It was like a B minus person. That's why I was doing that. And then same one about DC. All of a sudden I realized like I'm running around trying to extinguish all these fires, but the actual fuel that's giving these fires is talent, and so like that's actually the thing I need to be solving. I don't need to go to these situations and do these diving saves. I got to get to the root of the problem, which is I got to have A players in all these key roles so we get through this, and he says, Graham, you've told me you want to build the number one private equity firm in the world. Are you going to do that with B and B minus people in these key roles? I'm like, obviously it's a rhetorical question. I'm like, no. But then the next thing he says to me is, okay, Graham, if you're somebody as a leader who keeps B and C people in these key positions, how would you rate yourself as a CEO? And I was like, oh, that hurt. And all of a sudden I was like, okay, I get it. And at that moment, I literally wrote down in my journal, like, I am in the talent business. I'm not in the private equity business. I'm not in the software business. I'm in the talent business first and foremost. So my job is to get the very, very best people here at Alpine and at these companies. And then you say, well, obviously everyone wants to do that. So that's not really that. I mean, maybe the thing that most people wouldn't expect is that's way more correlated than the industry, the purchase price of the business, the finance structure. The talent is way more highly correlated to the returns. So that's probably surprising. But to say like, oh, we want the best people, kind of everyone says that. So the magic is you got to make your firm a place where the very best people want to go. And I spend probably more than half of my time on that problem. Like, how do I make the role at these portfolio companies something where the best people want to go and take those roles? How do I make the roles at Alpine where we can attract the very best people? So, and then how do we make sure it's a place where they stay and spend their career? So it sounds like mom and apple pie, but it actually ends up being on my calendar as my number one thing that I spend time on.
It's the highest form of leverage. And to dispel another, I think, social narrative we're given, it's the most successful people are the ones who are hyper talented themselves, very individualistic. And you, I think in order to be in your position, you have to be hyper talented. But it's actually, I think the smartest people recognize that the most leverage you'll ever get is actually by hiring a bunch of people who are even better than you ideally to do jobs for you.
Well, the math is really simple, which is I'm one person.
Yes.
And I could be super effective, but if I spend my energy hiring one person, I've more or less doubled my output. And then if I hire another one and another one. The other thing that's probably not obvious is the difference between an A and a B is not like 10%. Over the course of a decade,
yep,
it could be like 200 times.
Yes.
300 times. So like it's wildly asymmetric. and so once you realize that, and you start to realize what an A is, and you start to have worked with A's and know how to spot them and know how to evaluate them, then you realize that the real power is that delta between the A and the B.
And I totally hear you on that. And I've made so many mistakes already in my career around the A versus B player piece. I think it's a lot easier said than done to identify them. So I'm curious, what are the traits, or how do you discern? There's so many B plus players out there. How do you truly discern an A plus player?
All right. So I'll again dispel a really common myth, which is, let's say that I'm hiring a CEO for a healthcare software business. Here's how everyone else does it in my business, in private equity. They hire Russell Reynolds or Heidrick, and they say, I want a CEO of a healthcare company. They say, great. They go find all the people who run healthcare companies. There's whatever number of people. Then they want the people that are available at this comp that want to work at this company, and they're down to like 3 people, So they're hiring for experience, right? That's their number one criteria. what we've found is the most highly correlated thing is attributes. Like, I don't care what you've done as much as I care about who you are. So we hire for attributes. Attributes is like your persistence, your drive. We the number one thing is the will to win. Are you someone who just, like, when you put your name on something, it happens? That will leap out of an interview. It will just come out. It'll be so obvious when you talk to someone. We have a real structured interview process which I probably won't go into today, but by the end of that process, that leaps out of there, or it doesn't. And if it doesn't, then that's your answer too. So we're hiring for attributes over experience.
I love that. And makes me feel a little bit better about our hiring process, where we have a rubric and we lay out the values of our company and how much they align with that. And then also the technical side of the job itself, like, do they fit that functionally? But I want to end the interview off really focusing on some more tactical advice of how you live your life every day in a way that anyone can follow immediately today. I'm curious for you, once again, early 20s self, what advice tactically would you give to that person to be like, if you do all of these things, I promise you on a 20-year or 10-year time horizon, you will be successful?
Yeah, I think I'm gonna go ahead and say, like, kind of three parts. You kind of have to know where you are, know where you want to go, and kind of know how to get there. Okay, so let me go through each one. In terms of who you are, it's like, who are you at your very, very best? And also, what are some limiting beliefs you have? What's the story you're writing? Really do some work on, like, where are you right now, and be intellectually honest. Write it down. Like, I used to write down all my limiting beliefs, the things I thought, I wasn't good at. Like, all that has to come out. So where are you right now? Next is, what do you actually want? I can't tell you how many people I talk to, students or folks at Alpine, they actually don't know what they want. This is a great place to spend some energy, like what does success look like? Like, how could you hit a goal you don't have? So spend some time. And on the what do you want, 3 pieces of advice. One is, decide what you would do if you knew you wouldn't fail. Like, that's the thing you're going to be most excited about. So number one, give yourself really permission to dream. Number 2 is, think in terms of 5 or 10 years out. Don't think in terms of 1 year or 2 years, because there's way too many constraints in 1 or 2 years. You have to push that out. And because in 5 or 10 years, almost anything you can imagine is gonna yield. And the third one is this quote from it's an executive coaching quote, which is, the how is the killer of all great dreams. So suspend the how. So 5 years out, 10 years out, what would you do if you didn't fail? And don't worry about how you're going to do it. And that's really where you want to go. Once you get clear on that, then working backwards from that, it's actually not that hard. And there's a bunch of different tactics you can use. A couple that I'll throw out. One is, make a list of 30 things you could do to move toward that goal. Like, literally sit down and don't move until you have 30 things. Make a list of 6 people that could help you on that. Make a list of things you could read to help you on that. Make a list of people that have done that before. Just like the tactics of getting there, believe it or not, are actually the easy part. It's you being super clear on where you're going and where you're starting from. That's the thing that most people miss.
I love that. And I couldn't agree more. And what I'm reflecting on as you say that is how much throughout our lives our goals actually change. Because if you had asked me a couple of years ago what my goals were, I would have said, start a company that's successful, go to Stanford Business School, all these things. And now for me, you're just saying that, I was like asking myself, what do I want? I was like, I just want to be happy. And so I'm curious for you. You once told me a couple months ago that you want to build the greatest private equity fund of all time. You want to be the very best at whatever you do. So I'm curious, what are your goals now that you've achieved conventional success?
Yeah, I mean, I think that with respect to, my private equity firm, that's still my goal. I mean, I still want to be the greatest private equity firm of all time. I love that energy. I just I don't know how to approach it any other way. Yeah. I don't know even why you would come to work if that wasn't your goal. Yeah. So, I mean, that is definitely our goal. And we wake up every day thinking about how to do that today, next year, 5 years, 10 years. And we start putting in place, we start planting trees today that aren't even going to yield any shade or fruit for 5, 10 years. So we're constantly like fighting on that goal. One of my other goals is I do teach at Stanford, and I feel like I've been able to have an impact with students and, have them think a little bit more deeply about what they really want and who they really are and where they want to go. And I've noticed that and I'd like to do that on a broader scale. And I guess that's why I'm on social media, is to try to have an ability to bring that to a broader audience than just the students at Stanford Business School. So I'm still sorting that out. I'm not sure how, exactly how to do that, but I'm working on it.
Well, what I'd say to everyone watching is, if you're not already following Graham on TikTok, he's the cool dad with the great advice. So you should follow him on TikTok. Almost at 1 million. So congratulations.
Thank you.
Final question for you, which is, if you could put one thing on a billboard, so like the one piece of advice you could give everyone out there, what would it be?
It'd probably be great things take time.
I love it. It's I think we've dispelled a lot of notions today around instant gratification, what truly makes one happy. Like really, you have to think through that and make mistakes through that, and then compounding. So Graham, I appreciate the time.
Thank you, John. It's fun.